Hey guys, so in honor of March of the Mammoths, which is coming up next month, which is, by the way, I should introduce what that event is in case you don't know. March of the Mammoths is an event that takes place in March, obviously, that's hosted by Jason over at Old Booth Chapter and Verse. It was his original idea, and he invited myself and Alex from Big Al Books along to host it. And it's an event where we invite people to read books that are 800 plus pages, mammoths, as we call them colloquially. And that is just to encourage people to read, these big, intimidating books that are sort of on another plane of, longness and perhaps intimidation. And the point is just to try for it, it's not a big deal if you don't, finish it in the month, but it's just to get people to, pick up some of those giant books that maybe have sat on their shelf for a long time, and that they've just felt too intimidated to read. And so, what I wanted to do in honor of that, in anticipation of that, is just to casually walk through all of the books on my shelves that qualify as mammoths. So I have used a strict criterion of 800 pages, so there are no cheats here, except for, I think, maybe one somewhere, one or two, but I promise you that they're not really cheats, and I'll elaborate on that when I get to them. And this is just me casual video, really. I just want to walk through them just for the fun of it, really. So I'll be talking about a bunch that I have read, but then a ton that I have not, barely even opened once. So, yeah, and obviously I have my one that I am going to be reading for March of the Mammoths, which is, of course, Anna Karenina, which I'm going to be buddy reading with Noah over at Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse. Obviously, this is by Leo Tolstoy, one of his big masterpieces. He also has War and Peace, of course, which I haven't read, and which I'm not sure I'm ever going to read because it just honestly doesn't interest me that much, but maybe I will. So I thought I would start with the one that I am going to be reading. I will say that in terms of what I might want to read for March of the Mammoths, I'm sort of vacillating between just sticking with Anna Karenina alone and just letting myself read other things alongside it, or being super ambitious and trying to read, a bunch of mammoths in March. I think Alex over at Big Al Books, she sort of challenged herself to read, I think she read 3 last year, maybe 4, and I think she's going to try something like that this year. I'm not so sure. I don't know whether that will be fun or whether I will just end up feeling a lot of pressure for that. There are just a lot of short books that I want to read too in the month. So, but anyway, so I thought I would start with Anna Karenina, which I'm going to be reading. Then I thought I would go into some of the ones that I have read that are here. And in terms of which ones I have read, in some cases it's a little bit complicated, which is a weird thing to say, but for example, with something like Shakespeare After All by Marjorie Garber, this is, where does this clock in at? 943 pages. Or no, sorry, not, just over 900 pages, anyway. And, so yeah. But it's just a walkthrough of all of Shakespeare's plays, all 38 of Shakespeare's plays. Each of these is based on a lecture that Marjorie Garber gave in a course she used to teach, which was a survey of all of Shakespeare's plays. I believe it was a 2-semester course, because I don't think you could possibly get through all 38 of Shakespeare's plays in one semester. So they're really kind of commentaries on the plays, each one, short commentary. And I have found this to be an invaluable companion to Shakespeare. I love finishing a Shakespeare play and then going and seeing what Marjorie Garber has to say about it, because she just always brings out themes and insights that I wouldn't have been able to pick up on myself, because I'm obviously not a scholar or as smart as she is. But I have read, of the chapters in here, I have read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I've read 15 of the chapters in here. So, I've read maybe a third of the book, but not the entire thing. So yeah, in terms of, dividing these books into the ones that I have and ones that I haven't read, it's a bit complicated. But anyway, this is a really good introductory volume to Shakespeare, but I wouldn't call it a book that you would ever, start at the beginning and read all the way to the end, because, again, it's I feel like the chapters are most meaningful just after you've read the play, and unless you're literally going to start where she starts with the two gentlemen of Verona and end with the two noble kinsmen like she does, you're just going to kind of be just poking around, picking and choosing here and there to read about the plays that you've just recently read. So it's not a mammoth that I would pick for a readathon like this, but it is nonetheless a huge book. And then we also have here Plutarchs Lives. This is a modern library edition of the translation by John Dryden, and again, I think I've read like 5 of Plutarch's Lives that are in here, and this book is, I think, like 1,400 or so pages. It's gigantic, and again, not something that I think I would ever start at the beginning or recommend anyone start at the beginning and read through to the end, just because there are going to be certain people who you've heard of, who you're more interested in than others, certain people who've become obscure and aren't considered as important as maybe Plutarch considered them. There are a lot of people in this book that he writes about who I have never heard of, even. And so, again, it's just like, because these are like mini biographies, you're just gonna pick the ones that you find most interesting and that you're most into, or something like that. Or, like, also, like, you can pick them on other bases as well. I mean, like, for example, Elena Macreadin and I buddy read The Life of Pompey and The Life of Julius Caesar because we wanted to read Lucan's epic poem about the Civil War between Caesar and Pompey. So, you can pick them on those bases too, because a lot of these lives have been the source material for other works of literature, like Shakespeare. Shakespeare's Julius Caesar is based on the life of Brutus, I believe, in large part. And, like, his play Antony and Cleopatra is based in large part on Plutarch's life of Mark Antony. And, so anyway, again, another mammoth that you might not necessarily read all the way through. And the same goes for these last two. So this is the Modern Library Basic Works of Aristotle, which, this is almost 1,500 pages. Yeah, I'm not even sure I will try to read through this whole thing, because I don't particularly like Aristotle. I read his Poetics and his Nicomachean Ethics, and I want to read his Politics, and perhaps also the Metaphysics, but aside from that, I'm not really sure, because I just don't like reading Aristotle, because the books we have from him just are not good. They're just not, you can't read them for pleasure, basically. And then finally is the major works of Samuel Johnson, which is, so the actual body of the text in this one is 792 pages, but there's an introduction that is like more than 10 pages, and there are also a bunch of endnotes to this volume, so I count it just because, it has extra stuff that sort of pushes it over the mammoth limit. And, I haven't read this whole thing because it's like a collection of essays and some of his lives of the poets and some of his poems, too, and so it's not something I would ever read through all the way. But I just like poking around in this whenever I need a little 18th century British pomposity in my life, because that is a lot of what Samuel Johnson is, but also like a lot of, book talk, and just great writing. I like Samuel Johnson. Okay, so why don't we move on to ones that I have, like, read, rather than these ones that I've only sort of dipped into. So, I'm not going in any particular order. So this is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, her Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, which comes in at 962 pages. And yeah, this is a story of a 13-year-old boy, or he's 13 at the beginning of the book, whose mother is killed in a terrorist attack on an art museum in New York City. I'm not sure if it's the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but it's a museum of art in New York City. And his mother is killed, and he ends up sort of on a whim stealing this one painting, The Goldfinch, which is a famous painting by a Dutch artist named Fabricius. And he sort of carries it around for the rest of his life. And you just sort of follow him as he at first lives with a foster family, then lives with his father, who is kind of an asshole and a drug addict and an alcoholic and has a gambling problem, all these things. And you see Theo kind of struggle with his own substance abuse issues, and he also gets involved in the in selling forgeries of famous artworks. And so you just sort of follow him, and at the end it turns into this sort of mystery / like thriller sort of thing. I really like it. I really liked it. Parts of it were beautifully written. I really liked how it explored substance abuse and the kind of legacy of abuse that sort of can screw up young people who are raised in dysfunctional households, sort of, and how, just when a young person is raised in a dysfunctional household or, like, loses a parent very young, how it can kind of have ramifications throughout their whole life. I like that, and it's exploration of a substance abuse as well. That's definitely one I would recommend. The next one is a classic. This is The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, this edition only comes to 776 pages. However, there are many editions of The Brothers Karamazov that go well over 1,000 pages. It is a long book. And yeah, it's, you know, philosophical, but also, like, gripping, and just a great portrayal of just a horribly dysfunctional family. I really liked it. I probably don't like it as much as some other people. My favorite Dostoevsky is actually Crime and Punishment. But, this is still really, really good, and I probably need to reread it, too, just because I feel like I didn't quite grasp everything on the first reading. But, yeah, there's that one. Right, this is another Pulitzer Prize winner. This is a Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1985, I believe. Donna Tartt, I think, was in 2011 or 2013 or something like that. But, so Lonesome Dove, Lonesome Dove, I mean, I think it hardly needs an introduction, and just like anyone else, I really loved this. I loved the characters. One of the things that I like about it is that it manages to have compelling characters who are still, like, likable, like, are still, like, you can argue that they're good people. Like, a lot of the times, like in something like The Brothers Karamazov, or in The Goldfinch, it's easy to be, like, you know, they're compelling, but they're also not people you might necessarily want to, like, meet in real life, because they don't seem very nice. You could say that about most of the characters in The Brothers Karamazov, but, and you could arguably say it about the main character of The Goldfinch, but in this book, I felt like most of the characters were people I would actually like to meet. You know, they were, like, decent people, even the ones who were a bit gruff. There are a couple who are unpleasant, but they are mostly, not, like, main protagonists. And so I liked it for the fact that it, like, had likable characters who were still very compelling, who still, you know, were damaged and, you know, had their own sort of baggage, and, were still sort of screwed up in ways, and still had a lot to deal with in their sort of personal life and such. But yeah, I love this. I love this book. Alright, going on a completely different note, this is Les Morts d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory, his collection of Arthurian legends, and I liked this. I actually included it in my top 10 books in my BookTube top 10s tag. I don't really, in retrospect, think it should have been there, because I don't think I loved it quite enough to be on, like, top 10, maybe top 50 perhaps, but because long stretches of this book are just dreadfully boring, really. Like, so much of it is just, oh, X went to here and jousted with Y, and, you know, X was knocked from his horse, and Y helped him up, and then they gave each other a hug, and then they celebrated their exploits that evening, and so much of it is just these boring anecdotes that feel so irrelevant about, you know, that do, you know, are important in the sense that they portray sort of this idea of, like, medieval chivalry that was important, or at least romanticized by Sir Thomas Malory. But yeah, there's so much of it that it can get really tedious. But the parts of it that are, like, following the real Arthurian characters, you know, that are about, you know, Tristan and Isolde, that are, you know, about Arthur, Mordred, Lancelot, the quest for the Holy Grail, Guinevere, you know, Elaine, all the parts about the main characters that are, you know, really, what I would say the parts that matter, are really compelling. I love those parts, and it's a really, honestly, I find it to be a really profound and moving story at its heart. It just has a lot of sort of blubber on it that I don't feel like needs to be there. So I guess I could say I have a bit of a conflicted relationship with this book, and I guess that's a good point for me to talk about another book about the Arthurian legends, which is The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. And so Marion Zimmer Bradley is a horrible person who sexually abused her daughters. So, like, I feel like that's important. That's sort of an important thing to say at the outset, that I know she's a horrible person, but this is a really good book. And this is a sort of a reimagining of the Arthurian legends from the perspectives of all the female characters. So the main character is named Morgane, who, you know, is Morgan Le Fay, basically. And what she also does, in addition to putting it in the perspective of all the women, is she sets it in Britain just after the Roman Empire has abandoned it, and at a time where Christianity and the old pagan religion are in conflict with one another. Christianity is growing in power, and Morgan Le Fay, is a priestess of the old religion, as it's called, trying to sort of fight to preserve her way of life and the traditional sort of British religion. And so, like, you know, the Lady of the Lake is basically the high priestess of this religion, of the goddess of this old pagan religion, and Merlin is sort of the male counterpart to the Lady of the Lake in a sense. And Merlin isn't Merlin's name; it's a title. So there's a guy named Taliesin who has the title of Merlin at the beginning of the book, and then by the end of the book, another guy named Kevin has taken over the title of Merlin. So she also does this really interesting thing where she sort of sets it in this era where there was a lot of cultural upheaval, and she shows this sort of clash of religions. And that is fascinating because, and it's a very sort of feminist book. So the old religion of Britain was much more matriarchal, and the line of the succession and royalty was often traced through the women instead of the men. Women held much higher status. You know, there was a goddess who was sort of not the supreme deity, but who was like one of the most important gods. So it's also kind of feminist in that sense, in the sense that it's the old religion, which is more matriarchal, is in conflict with Christianity, which is very patriarchal. And I would say that this novel, in addition to just being a great story, great story, just it brings me to tears every time I read it. I've read it twice, or 3 times. No, twice. Sorry, I've read it twice. Brought me to tears both times. But what was really important for me personally with this book is it got me thinking about, like, women's issues, basically, about, like, feminism and sexism and patriarchal oppression and stuff like that. And it got me thinking about Christianity, too, and the sort of criticisms of Christianity that are raised in this book. And so it's really important to me, too, and just in terms of, like, my sort of socio-political view of the world, I suppose, in the sense that, of what, the nature of sexism and the nature of the patriarchy and stuff like that, and just sort of bring my attention. I mean, I was like 15 when I first read it, so like I hadn't really had much of a chance to think about it at that point. So yeah, I sort of credit it with making me into the sort of feminist, if a male can be a feminist, that I am right now. Anyway, that's a strong recommend. Actually, I feel like most of these have been recommendations. I guess the one that I would say that I can't wholeheartedly recommend is Aristotle, because again, I think he's insufferable. Les Morts d'Arthur definitely isn't for everyone, but the rest of them, definitely. I mean, if you're into ancient literature, definitely Plutarch. If you're into Shakespeare, then you'll like Shakespeare After All. So anyway, but that's getting sidetracked. Alright, next one is a book that I guess I can't really say you shouldn't read, but also isn't a book that I liked very much, and that in fact I kind of hated by the end, and that I don't know, maybe I'll read it again at some point, but it's Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. This translation is by Walter Starkey, and I just found this book so tedious and repetitive, and just so many of the different anecdotes just seem so utterly pointless. It was just boring. It was just so boring. I mean, I have to say though that despite that, I still think that Don Quixote and Sancho Panza are really, really compelling characters. I'm sort of fascinated by them. I do want to read sort of criticism on Don Quixote and sort of perspectives on Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, because again, I think they are fascinating characters. You know, you have this guy who is so deluded by this sort of old romanticized idea of chivalry that he, you know, literally goes out and tries to be a knight in shining armor, even though he's like a, you know, kind of a bumbling idiot. And then you have Sancho Panza, who kind of sees through the facade, sort of sees how absurd Don Quixote's ideals are, yet for some reason sticks by Don Quixote's side. One of the most fascinating questions about Don Quixote is, why does Sancho Panza stick with Don Quixote, really? Like, even though he can see how absurd it all is, why does he go along with it? You know what I mean? It's like, is he just enjoying himself? Does he maybe believe it on some level, even if intellectually he doesn't believe it? I don't know, but, and yeah, and then you have Don Quixote, again, who's just trying to strive to, you know, live up to these ideals that aren't really relevant anymore. And so, yeah, I didn't enjoy reading this book, but I do find them both fascinating characters. So anyway, there's Don Quixote. A lot of people do love Don Quixote, though. In fact, Alex from Miguel Books is one of my fellow hosts, who I think she said that this is one of her favorite books. And I know that, like, Jennifer, Insert Literary Pun here, said that this is one of her favorite books. And so I guess I might just be missing something. I don't know. I may have I may have binge read it too much. What I've heard from a lot of people is that this is a good book to read, like, chapter by chapter, like a chapter a day or something. And so I may have just sort of overdosed on it, and yeah, but I'm not even sure if I'm ever going to reread it. So anyway, moving on to a mammoth that really needs no introduction, The Lord of the Rings. I have this movie tie-in edition. Yeah, I obviously love The Lord of the Rings, although my favorite Tolkien is the Silmarillion. But yeah, so The Lord of the Rings. I mean, I love it, of course. You know, I love the movies. I love the book. I've only read the book once, though, I will say. You know, for a Tolkien fan, having read The Lord of the Rings only once is a little weird. But I will say that I feel like I'd make up for by the fact that I read the Silmarillion like 5 times. So yeah. But anyway, yeah, obviously Lord of the Rings is great. Although I feel like the Lord of the Rings, reading the Silmarillion really puts the Lord of the Rings in much better context, I think. Yeah, just because, like, it sort of shows you the historical importance of what's going on in the Lord of the Rings, I think. And so that's another sort of boon of having read the Silmarillion. But anyway, and then lastly, of the books that I have read, the mammoths that I have read, this is the Mahabharata, a modern retelling by Carol Satyamurthy. And this is what I read for March of the Mammoths last year. And it's an ancient epic poem from India about a civil war within this royal family. 2 branches of this royal family called the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And it's, you know, on its surface, it's this dynastic struggle for domination over this kingdom, but really it's a philosophical epic about, you know, the meaning of life and the meaning of the universe and everything. And it's so good. Like, it has that philosophical weight to it, in terms of the themes it explores, but it also has just brilliant drama. Just drama that is just worthy of any Greek tragedian, I think. Or worthy of Shakespeare, and it's just great. I love it. And this translation, I mean, it's a long book, but I mean, I don't know how well you're going to see that, but, oh, you're not going to see it at all, are you? Yeah, so, like, even though it's long, it's written in verse, so there are fewer words per page, so it goes by pretty quickly, I have to say. But yeah, definitely that one is a recommend. Alright, now we move into the books that I have not read, and so I won't have as much to say about these, so hopefully this video won't go on for too much longer. But the first one here is another epic poem, this time from Iran. So this is the Shahnameh by Abul Qasim Ferdowsi, and it's an epic poem about the kings of Persia, basically. Starting with the creation of the universe and going up, I think, until the arrival of Islam in Persia, and it I haven't read it, so I don't quite know what to say. But it's sort of semi-historical, like a lot of the kings who were in here did exist, but they, obviously the stories are kind of dramatized. The next one I have here is Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray, which I honestly don't know that much about, to be totally honest. I bought it because it's on Steve Donahue's Western Canon Starter Kit list, and yeah, I want to read that entire list, and so yeah, that's just one I got basically for that reason. This is Middlemarch by George Eliot, obviously another book that kind of needs no introduction. I did start to read this one last year. I read about 100 pages and was actually really liking it, was really liking the writing, but just got distracted by other books. So I don't know, this might be one that that might be good to pick up for March of the Mammoth this year, at the same time as Anna Karenina. But we will see. I've heard things about Middlemarch that make me think that I particularly will like it, because it's very sort of epic in scope. Sort of, I heard people comparing it to like the Russians, to like Tolstoy and others, which would make it great to read alongside Anna Karenina. But anyway, right, and then we have two Dickens novels. So this is David Copperfield and Bleak House. Obviously, Jason is losing his mind right now. So this copy of David Copperfield, I think, is only 735 pages. But again, there are plenty of editions of David Copperfield that are longer than that, so I'm counting it. And then there's the Penguin Classic of Bleak House, which comes in at I haven't been talking about the page count of all of these. Sorry about that, but I'm sure you're not too devastated. It's already a long enough video, I think. So this is 989 pages, and I think that this is Jason's favorite book of all time. I think, if I remember correctly. And I did hear someone say that this would be a good place for me to start with Dickens. I have read one Dickens, which is Great Expectations, and I hated it. And so I've been hesitant to pick up Dickens, just because, I don't know, so many of the characters in Great Expectations I felt like were just like so cartoonish and unrealistic. But like Jane Austen, it's like an author that I would like to actually like try to get into at some point. But I will keep trying. Okay. So, just moving a few books closer to me. We return to Larry McMurtry. This is Comanche Moon, which is a prequel to Lonesome Dove. And then this next one is really probably the mammoth to end all mammoths. This is Joseph and His Brothers by Thomas Mann, which I think is something like almost 1,500 pages. It's, what is it, 1,492 pages, and it's a big epic novel about the Book of Genesis, basically a retelling of the Book of Genesis. Joseph and his brothers, and Joseph's sort of abduction into Egypt, or his brothers selling him into slavery in Egypt, and his sort of clever, not seduction, but like he sort of gets the Pharaoh of Egypt to value his opinion, value him as an advisor, and so he kind of rises from this position of a slave to being very powerful in Egypt. Anyway, so yeah, it's just, I haven't read it, and it's a huge book though. Okay, going back to another classic, this is the Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by Wayne Rebhorn. I did start to read this once. I read like 2 or 3 of the stories in it, and was actually enjoying them quite a bit. They are really funny. But yeah, it's just another classic that I want to tick off my list. And where does it clock in at? 800 something, I think. 800. Where are we? 860 pages. Yeah. Anyway, alright, changing gear completely to the 20th century. This is Underworld by Don DeLillo, which I don't really know much about, but I've heard is a really good book. And Don DeLillo is one of these postmodern writers who I'd like to read at some point. Okay, now we're going, the rest of these are all non-fiction, so if you're not interested in non-fiction, be warned. But this is Hugging the Shore, Essays and Criticism by John Updike. Probably another book that I would never read I would never read cover to cover because it's a collection of essays, you know, sort of occasional prose that he wrote. But you know, anyway, it does still qualify as a mammoth. And it's 880, just about exactly 880 pages. So yeah, big book. Okay. Next one is Ron Chernow's biography of George Washington. After Abraham Lincoln, George Washington is probably the American president who I want to learn about the most. And I've heard good things about this, and it won the Pulitzer Prize, so yeah. Alright, we're sticking with American history here. This is the Oxford History of the American People by Samuel Eliot Morison. I've heard great things about Samuel Eliot Morison, even though I haven't heard much about this book in particular. But yeah, I've been wanting for a long time to read a one-volume history of the United States, because it's been just so long. You know, last time I learned about American history was in high school, and yeah, I need to read more. So, but I think that reading stuff like the Washington biography, or reading biographies of other presidents, or reading, for example, another book I'm about to talk about, which is The Battle Cry of Freedom, which is a history of the Civil War, reading those sort of more pigeonholed areas of history might be a good way to get more acquainted with more of the details of American history before, and that might make reading a big history book like the Samuel Eliot Morison more palatable. But anyway, we will see when I get to that. And then obviously we have Battle Cry of Freedom, the Civil War Era by James McPherson, another Pulitzer Prize winner. And yeah, right now I am reading Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and so it has my mind really on the Civil War. And so yeah, this is one that's been sort of on my mind. But yeah, I don't know if I'm quite ready to just leap right into another gigantic work of history after finishing one other, but yeah, anyway. Right, last two have a strong religious bent to them. So this is the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the revised and updated translation of sacred Gnostic texts, edited by Marvin Meyer. So yeah, this is just a collection of Gnostic scriptures, basically, and I did read about 200 pages of it once, years and years and years ago. At that point in my life, it kind of flew over my head, because I don't think I quite knew what I was getting myself into, honestly. But yeah, Christian Gnosticism is something I would like to read more about at some point, but just haven't made much headway into. And then finally, last mammoth of the video. This is going to be an insanely long video. This is Christianity, the First 3,000 Years by Diarmaid MacCulloch. And yeah, I mean, it's about 1,000 pages, I think. 900, or no, 1,000, hold on. 1,016 pages. Yeah. And I've heard nothing but good things about this book. So, and it's very much up my alley, the history of Christianity. So, those are all the mammoths on my bookshelf. I guess I could have included the Bible as a mammoth. This is my New English Bible, because it is gigantic. But I guess, I don't know, I didn't think of a religious text as exactly counting, because I don't think because the Bible is kind of a book of books, I don't think of it as something, again, that you read, like, cover to cover. But, I guess I should give it a shout out. But, anyway, those are my mammoths. I hope you all enjoyed this video. You know, it was kind of a rambly, unscripted, I didn't even have any notes prepared for this video. I just kind of grabbed all my mammoths down and, turned the camera on. So I hope it wasn't too incoherent, and yeah, I mean, I thought it would just be sort of a nice casual video for, you know, people to sit down and casually watch while they eat dinner or something. But anyway, so if you have thoughts on any of these books, I'm of course eager to hear, and you know, if you've read any of them, certainly, and any that you would recommend, let me know, or not recommend, let me know. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you have a nice day, and happy reading.